Hi, in this assignment, we will learn how to use UiPath to swap the values of two variables. So imagine we have two variables, variable 1 and variable 2. And variable 1 has the value of A, and variable 2 has the value of B. So after swapping, we will get variable 1 equals to B and variable 2 equals to A. So that's our objective, right? We want to swap the values of the variables. So this process is very intuitive to our human brain. But how do we translate this process to a language that's understandable to humans, to machines, especially like the automation routines. So the key thing here is that we are going to use a third variable. Let's call it a swap variable. Let's use this swap variable to help us with the swapping. So the idea is that in the first step, we will assign the swap variable a value with the value of variable 1. That is to say, we assign the value of variable 1 to swap variable. So now swap variables is equal to A. And we have variable 1 as equals to A, and variable 2 is still B. Okay, and then in step 2, we want to change the value of variable 1 into the value of variable 2. So that is to say, we assign variable 1 with the value of variable 2. So now variable 1 equals to B. And we have swap variable, which equals to A, and our variable 2 is equal to B. So now you notice that we already swapped the value of variable 1, right? So now we are going to change the value of variable 2 into A. And how to do that? And so here we are going to use the swap variable's value. So here we are going to assign variable 2 with the value of the swap variable. So now variable 2 equals to A. We have variable 1 equals to B already. So by using a swap variable and by going through the 3 steps, we can complete the swapping procedure to achieve our goal of changing the values of the two variables. So that's the purpose of the assignment. And by going through the assignment, you will learn many basics of how to use UiPath Studio. So in the assignment, we basically have 2 sequences of processes. So in the first sequence, let's call it process 1, we will create 2 variables and assign them values. And we achieve this by using an activity called input dialog, which is similar to a chat box that promotes a chat box to the user, and then the user input the value into the chat box. In process 2, we will go through the 3 steps to complete the swapping. And process 1 and process 2 will be contained in let's call it a main process or a main sequence. So this is how the bot will look like. So now let's go ahead and create our bot. So I'm logging into my parallel desktop in order to have Windows operating system. And now I'm opening UiPath. So let's follow the assignment instruction and go through each steps. So let's create a new project or new process. And let's name our process as variable swapping. So I'm gonna name it as this. Okay, so now we are in the designer panel. So we can click Open Main Workflow to access the designer panel. And if you look at the left-hand side, you will see that there are 3 tabs at the bottom. So there are project, activities, snippets. Make sure that you are on the activities tab. So you can just click on that and then you will be on the activities panel. So the activities panel contains all the activities you need to configure a bot. And to search, to obtain any activity, you can just search the name of the activity at the search bar. So now we are going to start building our bot. Here we are going to use a sequence. So let's just double click or drag and drop into the designer panel. So a sequence is the most basic workflow structure. And basically it means that we want different activities to be sequenced in an orderly fashion. And there are other formats of the workflow, and we will talk about those in future lectures. But here, let's just use sequence. So here, the sequence will be our main sequence, which will contain the 2 processes that I just introduced before. So we also talked about the best practices for naming. So we need to make sure that each activity or each sequence should be very understandable. So to do that, we can double click on the name of the box, and then let's edit the name to make it more descriptive. So we can say that this code is for swapping 2 numbers using a 3rd variable. Sometimes to make the description more clear, we can also use the comment activity. So to get the comment activity, we can search that activity in the search bar. So here I search comment, and we will find this activity here under debug. And here, let's add this activity inside the sequence box. And so here we can add our comment. So to do that, we can first click on the comment box and go to the right-hand side. So this part is called properties. And so basically, these are the parameters that you can adjust for each activity. And for the comment, let's go to the text parameter. And we can edit this by clicking the 3 dots icon. And we can insert our comment here. But make sure that you leave the 2 slashes. So here we can say taking input of 2 numbers from the user and swap them by using a 3rd variable. And I click OK, and you will see that the comment is here. Okay, so now we are going to create another sequence that contains 2 input dialogues, which will collect the inputs from the user. And the inputs will be the values that we want to assign to the variables. So we can just drag and drop another sequence after comment and within the big sequence. And let's rename the sequence as for promoting the user to give input. Sometimes we can also use the annotation function to add descriptions for an activity. So to do that, we can right-click and then you will see there is annotations option. Then we can choose add annotation. And we can add our description here. So we can say that this code is for swapping two numbers by using a third variable. And then you will see that the annotation is visible here. Okay, so now we are going to use an input dialog that can collect the input from the user. And we can search input dialog in the activities bar. And once we found it, we drag and drop this activity within our second sequence. Here, let's give a description for our input dialog. So you notice that once I double click this input dialog, it becomes big, right? And other boxes disappear. You can go back by looking at the top of your designer pane, and you will see that, yeah, it's because we are at the end of this process. So we can just go back by clicking the sequence, and then we will be back. So here, let's change the name or adding some description to this input dialog. So let's change this into input first variable by user. You can also add annotation using the same way that I described before. And here I will skip that to save some time. And we can give a title and label for the input dialog. So let's use the title first value. And let's use the label, please enter the first numeric value. And make sure that you put all your texts in quotation marks, because here these are string values, so you need to make sure that they are quoted. So when we run the bot, there will be a chat box with the title first value and with the sentence, please enter the first numeric value. And then the user can input their numbers into the dialog box. And that value is what we want to save in a variable. So here we want to create a variable that can save that value. So to do that, we can go to the right-hand side of the to get the properties of this input dialog. So here we can create a variable in the result section. So if we click this editable area, then right click, and we can see that there is an option of creating variable. So we click on that, and then let's create a variable called first input value. Okay, so you can see the variable that we just created by going to the variables panel. So the variables panel can be accessed by clicking the variable tab at the bottom of your UiPath Studio. So here I see that yes, I created a variable called first name value, and currently the default variable type is generic, which is fine, because in the lecture we mentioned that the generic value can hold like different types of common types of data. And here scope, we see that currently the scope is the second sequence. But because later on we want to swap the variable in a different sequence, we want to make the scope to be the main sequence, so that when we create a secondary, the second subsequence, we can still utilize this variable. So let's change the sequence into the main sequence. Okay, and so we follow the same procedure to create our second input dialog, and we put the second input dialog directly after the first one. And let's also change the name of the input dialog box, and let's name it as second variable by user. And similarly, we generate a title and a label. And we can create a second variable that stores this value, and we do it by going to the property pane and result. First, left click and then right click to create variable, and let's call it second input value. And we can see it in our variable pane, and let's also change the sequence into our main sequence. Okay, so sometimes one of the best practices when building bots is that we want to make sure we log every procedure. So one way to do the log is to use this activity called write line. So we find the write line and then drag and drop after our second input dialog box. So the write line will be an activity that can output some of the results we want to see in the output section of the UiPath Studio. So here we want to have a line indicating what variables we created and what values they hold. So to do that, we can enter our text. So here, obviously, they should be string variables, and the text should be in quotation marks. So let's say we want the bot to print this sentence. Okay, first value is, and here we want to get the value of our first variable. So to combine different strings or to concatenate different strings, we can use add. And here we see that we want first input value, right? And it's already here, but the first input value will be in most likely numeric value, so we want to convert it to string. So here we use the function toString to convert it into string. And then if we want to add a line between two sentences, we can use this VB language. So you can just follow the instruction environment and dot new line. So this indicates that we want a new line in between. And then we keep adding elements. Then second value is, so similarly we can add our second input value and convert it to string. Okay, so here one thing to notice is that it's better to have a space after the colon, because when if you don't have this space, you will see that the this text will be just directly followed by the value, which just doesn't look good. So if you want some readability, you can add some space here. Okay. So if you want to test the bot now, you can run the bot, and then you will see that, okay, the first text is enter the first numeric value. So let's try 1.5. Okay, and then the second, let's try 3.6, 4.6. Okay, and then we can now, if the bot goes back to this place, it means that it's successful. So where to find this right line message? We go to the bottom, very bottom, and there will be output, error list, breakpoints. Let's go to the output. You click there, and then you will see that this is basically the log of the bot, right? So this bot started, and then we have this message here. First value is 1.5. Second value is 4.6. So that's what we want. And we know that we successfully created the first sequence that creates two variables and that store that value. So now we can continue. Okay. So now let's continue with the second sequence. So I can minimize my first sequence just for readability. In the second sequence, we will follow the 3 steps to swap the value. So let's add another sequence here, and let's change the name of the sequence into swapping of numbers. You can also add annotation if you need more description. Okay, so now we will use the we will first create the swap variable. So to create that, we just need to go to the variable panel, and then directly create this variable. So we just need to create the variable in this way, swapping support variable, and we can also make it as a generic type, and to make the scope as the main scope. Okay, so now we are going to follow the 3 steps. So we need to use the activity called assign. So let's find that activity here, assign. Okay, so now let's drag and drop that activity inside. So remember, we first assign the swap variable with the value of variable 1, right? So we put swapping variable on the left-hand side, and then we assigned with the first input, first variable's value. And then let's continue assigning the values. So in the second one, we are going to assign the first variable with the value of the second variable, right? So if you forget what we talked about before, you can go back to the beginning of the video. And then we do a third assign, which is to change the value of the second variable into the swap variable's value. So in this way, we complete our swap. So you can also add annotations to the titles of each box to make it clear. And I will skip those procedures to save time. And here, So similarly, we can add a write line. One thing I want to mention is that another way to add activity is by clicking the add icon, and then you will see that you can also search activities from here, and you can also add activities. So here I can add a write line, and so similarly, we will do put the text in quotation marks. So here we can say first value after swapping is, and we leave a space, and add first input value that's converted into a string, and then let's add a line here. So we are going to do environment dot a new line, and then second value after swapping is, and then second value to string. Okay, so you can also minimize this process. So now this process is very clear, right? We have a main sequence which contains two subsequences. In the first subsequence, we use two input dialogues to collect users' inputs, which are values that we want to assign to the variables. In the second sequence, we follow the 3 steps. Actually 4 steps, right? We first create a swap variable, and then we follow 3 steps to do the swapping. And for each subsequence, we utilize write line as a way to see the output. Okay, so now let's run this bot. So we will see in the end whether the bot successfully swapped the variable, swapped the value. So let's say the first value is, I just give it a random number 1.7, and then let's say the second one is 8.4. Okay, so now if you can see the output panel here, our original first value is 1.7, second is 8.4, and after swapping, our first variable becomes 8.4 and second becomes 1.7. So now our swapping is completed and it's successful. I hope this video is helpful for you because this is your very first RPA practice. Once you follow the instructions, either in the video or in the document, you should be able to complete this assignment.